I never thought the day would come when I'd have to knock on the door of my own bedroom like an unwelcome stranger, and what stung the most wasn't just the silence behind that door. It was the absence of a single "Mom?" No guilty glance, no pause, only the sharp clacking sound of a mechanical keyboard, a booming headshot through a gaming headset, and the obnoxious laughter of three young men I'd never seen before, parked comfortably in the one room that had once been the most sacred place in my life. I turned away quietly. The hallway still shimmered with the glow of crystal sconces reflecting off polished walnut floors, an elegant beauty that no longer seemed meant for me. That bedroom had been where George and I once carefully chose the wallpaper print and silk pillows. It held the Hermes scarf I received on my 60th birthday, the Chanel dress I wore to address the board, and the handwritten letters George sent while battling illness, letters I'd never had the strength to open. And now, I'd been pushed into the downstairs study, generously renamed the guest lounge, even though it had no windows, still reeked of fresh paint, had weak air conditioning, and a bedside lamp with a burned-out bulb. The room that once held the heart of our home had become a gaming studio, and the person who had claimed it was none other than the boy I used to cradle in my arms, the same child who once looked up at me with his big brown eyes and asked, "Mom, do I look like Dad?" Living with my head bowed wasn't an option. If you've ever felt a similar ache, leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe. Every story here is a wake-up call for choosing compassion, but in the right places. Everything started to shift after my son lost his job when his third startup collapsed. He told me he'd only stay a few weeks to get back on his feet, but those weeks dragged into 18 months. At first, I cooked him dinner every evening. Then, I started leaving meals in the fridge. Eventually, he began ordering takeout, saying, "Your food just isn't what I'm used to anymore." I kept quiet until one day, I went upstairs and realized my vanity was gone. In its place was a glowing tower of RGB lights that looked like it belonged on a concert stage, surrounded by 3 leather gaming chairs that frankly cost more than the living room set. I asked him, "Andrew, I just want to know, what exactly did you move out of my room?" He didn't even look up from his screen. He just muttered, "I needed more space." "Your room has good light. You're fine sleeping downstairs. Who needs a master bedroom at 70 anyway?" That sentence, it pierced deeper than any insult, not because he took my room, but because, in his eyes, I had become an afterthought, a person simply occupying space in a life that no longer included me. And still, I stayed silent. I stayed silent when he brought his girlfriend to live with us without saying a single word to me. I said nothing when she strolled around the kitchen each morning in her nightgown as if she were the new lady of the house. I held my tongue when they told me I should knock before entering the living room in case they were watching a movie or live streaming with their friends. But that day, when I walked into the living room to retrieve the wedding album of George and me, I realized it was no longer there. I asked Andrew where it had gone. He shrugged and said, "What do you need that old stuff for, Mom?" I stored it away. I walked straight up to the second floor and opened the door to what I used to call the most peaceful place on earth. But when I stepped inside, I froze. The bookshelf had been shoved into a corner. George's antique armchair set was gone without a trace. In their place stood a mini fridge, stacks of energy drinks, and 3 unfamiliar young men sitting cross-legged on the floor, howling with laughter as they shouted into their headsets while shooting pixelated enemies on screen. One of them turned around and stared at me with confusion. Who are you, lady?" I turned around and walked away without uttering a single word. For the first time in months, my chest ached as though someone had tightened a rope around it, pulling harder with every step I took. It wasn't the rejection that hurt most. It was the realization that I had let it all go too far. That evening, I brewed a pot of special Earl Grey I'd ordered from London. I sat alone in a modest wicker chair on the front porch, staring at the soft light spilling from the upstairs window into the stillness of the yard below. I picked up my iPad and logged into the asset management system I'd once used to oversee the estate George left behind. I reviewed the real estate holdings, investment accounts, stocks, and savings. Everything was still in my name. I remained the sole legal owner of all that we had built over more than 40 years together. Nothing had changed, yet. But deep inside, I knew, if I kept on staying silent, it was only a matter of time before those things would no longer be mine. And in that quiet moment under the porch light, I knew without a doubt, something had to change. The next morning, I woke with a persistent sense of unease. It wasn't just the poor sleep or the sunlight piercing too early through the curtains in the cramped guest room. It was the gnawing awareness inside me. A mother's intuition finally coming to terms with the truth. My son no longer saw me as his mother. I stepped into the kitchen. The lingering scent of greasy takeout from the night before hung in the air. Andrew and his girlfriend, Olivia, I believe, were already at the counter, eating what they called brunch. It was nothing more than a soggy sandwich and a half-hearted smoothie, carelessly spread out on the marble countertop I once treasured like a centerpiece of our home. "Good morning," I said gently, breaking the silence. Olivia didn't respond. Andrew mumbled, "Morning, Mom." But his eyes remained glued to his phone screen. I opened the cabinet to grab my tea, the lacquered wooden box inlaid with mother of pearl that George had gifted me during our trip to Kyoto, only to find it shoved into the back corner. In its place was a sleek, expensive coffee machine. I certainly hadn't bought it. I turned and asked, "Where did this machine come from?" Andrew shrugged. "It's Olivia's. She's used to this kind." I didn't ask anything more, but something shifted inside me. A quiet, growing question began to take root in my mind. If he could so easily replace the little things in this kitchen without ever asking me, then what else, what more significant things was he quietly changing behind my back? That night, I walked into the old reading room, now the place where I was temporarily sleeping, to retrieve my bank ledger notebook. But when I reached for the drawer, I found it locked. That drawer had never been locked before. George always said, "We have nothing to hide from each other," and I had honored that sentiment for all these years. But now it had a new lock. I asked Andrew. He looked up from the sofa and said casually, "Oh, Olivia needed a place to keep her documents. I figured you weren't using it, so I swapped the lock. It's no big deal." No big deal? It was my room, my desk, my documents, and most painfully, it was where I had kept George's letters, his notes, the things that still carried his presence in our home. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I walked out the front door, straight to the Porsche Cayenne. I still kept like a sacred memory of George, the very car he surprised me with on my 65th birthday, just before we learned about the cancer. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just wanted to breathe air that didn't feel borrowed. I wanted to remember who I had been before I became the woman with assets they're waiting on. Eventually, I pulled over at an old cafe tucked in a quiet corner by the lake, the one George and I used to visit once a month. We would always order warm lattes and sit in silence, reading like two old friends who didn't need words to feel close. This time, I ordered a pot of tea. I opened my iPad and logged into the estate management system again, but this time, I examined everything more carefully. Under the Linked Accounts tab, something caught my eye. A new email had been added to the list of secondary access holders, one I'd never seen before. It read, andrewwhitmore.guestmail@. I had never granted that permission. I opened the system log. The record showed that the change had been made 3 days ago from an IP address located inside my own home. A chill ran down my spine. It wasn't the access itself that terrified me. It was the fact that I hadn't known it happened at all. Andrew knew my password. I had given it to him years ago, trusting that if anything ever happened to me, at least he would know how to handle the family's assets. But now, I was starting to see the truth. He had begun using that access not to protect my estate, but to build a new life for himself atop everything I had worked for. That evening, I decided it was time to speak up. I walked to the doorway of what was now Andrew's gaming room, or more accurately, my former bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. I knocked once, then stepped inside. Olivia was lying comfortably on my bed, the one I had once dressed with linens imported from Italy. Andrew sat hunched in his usual gaming chair, headphones around his neck, eyes still fixed on the glowing screen. "Andrew, I need to talk to you," he sighed, pulling off the headset. "What now, Mom?" I kept my voice calm. "Why did you add an email to my financial account without asking me first?" He looked at me, startled for a split second, then quickly shifted to a tone of indifference. "Oh, that? It's just to help you keep track." "You're getting older, Mom. A lot of this stuff is complicated. I thought I'd clean up the investment portfolio a bit, maybe move some funds around for better returns. It's not a big deal." "Doing it without asking me is a big deal." "Oh, come on, Mom," he replied, annoyed. "You're making this dramatic. I live here. I'm just trying to help manage things. Or are you planning to keep everything locked up forever and never let me touch any of it?" I looked at him for a long moment. "Yes, because it's mine. And because you never asked. You just took the liberty." Olivia chimed in from the bed, her voice light but patronizing. "I think older people just get sensitive about these things. Andrew's just looking out for you, that's all." I turned and looked at her, the woman lying in the bed George and I had shared for 40 years. I didn't reply. I simply turned and walked out. but inside me, the decision had already been made. The next morning, I contacted Diana, our longtime family attorney, the one who had helped George and me set up our entire power of attorney framework back when he was still alive. I arranged to meet her at the old office where George used to work. I brought with me every single document we'd ever filed, the property deed, the investment accounts, asset titles, and even the original household registry listing me as the sole head of household. Diana, I said after laying everything out, I need to reset all access rights immediately, and I want a clear clause added. No one, not even my son, is allowed to handle any part of the estate without a handwritten signature from me in the presence of a legal witness. Diana nodded firmly. I'll take care of it right away. I also requested the following. All secondary access permissions to my online accounts must be revoked. Biometric verification should be added as an additional layer of security, and a personal ownership confirmation letter must be sent to my backup email, the one only George and I had ever used. When I walked out of her office, I understood clearly. This was no longer about defense. This was the beginning of a quiet counterattack. By the time I returned home, Olivia was standing in the middle of the living room, waving her laptop in frustration and calling out, "Andrew, the Wi-Fi's down again." Andrew came rushing downstairs, furiously tapping on his phone, brows furrowed. I stepped inside and set my handbag on the marble table. The Wi-Fi's down because I changed the internet plan and updated the password. Andrew turned to me, disbelief written all over his face. "What are you doing, Mom? You're ruining everything I've been trying to set up." I looked him straight in the eye, and with a calm but unshakable tone, I said, "No." I'm reclaiming everything I once gave without ever being asked. I've always believed that the most profound shifts don't come from yelling or impulsive outbursts. They come from the quiet, deliberate movements, the way water slowly erodes the mountain, or how a cold breeze silently finds its way through every crack in a doorframe. After that brief confrontation, Andrew retreated into what used to be my bedroom, locking the door as if guarding a hidden treasure. Olivia, meanwhile, kept complaining about the unstable Wi-Fi, the inconsistent hot water, and how I wasn't welcoming to guests. Guests? In the very home that George and I had poured our sweat into building from the ground up? I didn't argue. I didn't need to. Instead, I began to prepare, not for a loud war, but for a strategic withdrawal, a graceful reclaiming of my place, on my own terms. I stopped cooking, I stopped doing laundry, I stopped stocking groceries based on Andrew's preferences, not to punish them, but to return to them the freedom they seemed so eager to enjoy. I woke up early that morning and left the house while they were still asleep. I made my way to the senior community center 3 blocks away. It had gentle yoga classes, a cozy book club, and, something I never realized I needed, a circle of women my age, wise, quiet, and carrying stories that mirrored the weight I had been holding in silence. I began to speak, not much, just enough for them to nod in understanding and share their own experiences, of sons who wanted to restructure the estate, of grandchildren who didn't know their grandmother's name, of times when they were asked to stay in their room when company came over. They didn't tell me what to do. They simply listened, and their presence filled a void I hadn't been able to name for months. One Friday afternoon, by chance, I ran into Linda Harper, an old friend from when I was still a school principal. She was now volunteering for an organization that supports elderly people facing financial abuse within their families. We sat together in the same quiet cafe we used to frequent, sipping Earl Grey tea as I briefly explained everything. She placed her hand over mine, her expression turning serious. "Margaret, you know," she said gently, "what you just described could be considered a form of coercive control and financial exploitation under California law." I sat still, letting the words settle like stones in water. Linda continued, "I'm not saying you should take legal action, but I do think you need to be ready, and if you ever want to talk to someone, I can connect you with a few excellent professionals, discreet but very effective." I nodded slowly. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone. Over the next 2 weeks, I spent several hours each day reviewing every document I had. I opened the safe where I kept the original deed to the house, notarized copies of the will. George and I finalized, back when we were both in good health, and most importantly, a document hardly anyone knew existed, the most recent market appraisal of our mansion, which listed its value at $3.4 million, far higher than Andrew had ever guessed. I carefully noted down the serial numbers of every valuable item, George's collection of Swiss watches, our art pieces, the shares I held in the educational development fund I helped co-found, and the nearly $600,000 spread across 3 private bank accounts. I had no intention of disclosing those numbers to anyone, but I needed to be certain that if the day came, if Andrew ever decided to make his final move, I would be the one revealing my cards first. One morning, I deliberately left a fake bank letter on the kitchen counter. The note detailed plans to withdraw the entire $600,000 to invest in a real estate partnership with a new associate. It took less than 30 minutes before Andrew knocked on the door of the reading room, where I was sitting, calmly flipping through a book as I did every morning. "Mom, are you planning to invest in something?" he asked, his voice trying hard to sound casual. I smiled without looking up from my book. "An old friend made a suggestion. Nothing's certain yet. Why do you ask?" He sat down across from me. "Mom, you should have told me. I could help you choose the right investment. You know older people are easy targets for scams, right?" I nodded, still smiling. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'll take that into consideration." He stood up, his fist tightening slightly. That last line, gentle but firm, clearly bothered him, and that was exactly what I wanted. I needed him to feel unsettled. One late afternoon, while Andrew and Olivia were busy live streaming one of their video game sessions, I made a quiet call to Deborah Hayes, my longtime financial advisor. I asked her to meet me at the house, but specified that we would talk inside the car, not inside the house. I didn't want Andrew to suspect anything. We sat inside George's old Mercedes SUV, windows up, the soft hum of the engine giving us a sense of privacy. I looked her in the eye. "I want to move a portion of my assets out of the old system. I need to create an anonymous trust, just between you and me, and I want to be prepared in case my son tries to take this house." Deborah nodded solemnly. She didn't ask unnecessary questions. Later that same week, I signed a new legal agreement with Diana, my attorney. The clause was very specific. If I became unreachable for more than 72 hours without official documentation from a hospital or law enforcement agency, all asset control would transfer to a third party, a private educational nonprofit I had quietly founded last year in George's name, the George Foundation. In other words, if I ever disappeared, Andrew would never get his hands on what he was after. I called Caleb, the son of a former classmate who had worked in media security. I asked him to help me install a discreet camera system throughout the house. Not for spying, but to document anything suspicious. We also installed hidden software on the shared laptop, software capable of capturing screenshots of any login attempts into my financial platforms. I hoped I'd never have to use it. But if Andrew dared to try anything, I wanted irrefutable evidence. I opened a brand new email account and drafted a letter, one addressed to Diana's office, 2 local newspapers, and the television stations that had once interviewed me during my time as a school principal. The subject line read, "When my son tried to steal my home, this is the truth." I didn't send it. I simply saved it. But deep down, I knew that if the time ever came, I would not hesitate. No one had a clue what I was preparing. Andrew kept smiling, kept playing, kept ordering pizza like nothing in the world had changed. And Olivia still called me Aunt Margie, with that sugary, hollow voice that barely concealed the entitlement underneath. But I knew. The game had changed. I was no longer the mother pushed into the corner of her own home. I was Margaret Whitmore, and I was coming back. Some days passed as if nothing had shifted at all. Ordinary days, so deceptively calm that anyone looking from the outside might believe the storm had passed. But in reality, those were the most dangerous days, because the fiercest storms often arrive right after the wind dies down. I still rose early, still sipped my tea on the porch, still offered a quiet smile whenever Olivia passed by without a greeting. I didn't need her to acknowledge me. I only needed her to underestimate me just a little bit more. And she did. One morning, I walked into the kitchen and saw that her coffee machine had been moved to the highest shelf while my tea box had been shoved down near the trash bin. I said nothing. I simply picked up the box, brushed off the dust, and placed it gently on a separate shelf in the reading room, a space I had begun to reclaim and recreate on my own terms. A new reading chair, a soft, moss-colored rug, a vintage amber reading lamp from the antique market in Pasadena. I didn't need my old bedroom back. I was building a new room entirely, one that no one else had the right to touch. Andrew never asked where I went each morning or why I returned later than usual, but I could sense him watching. One day, I intentionally left my assets summary notebook slightly open on the desk. The next morning, I found a newspaper article about real estate investment risks neatly placed on the kitchen counter, as if it were a subtle reminder from someone who thought he was still in control. I didn't touch the paper. I just smiled, quietly. That evening, as I passed by the living room, I heard faint whispers through the crack in the door. Olivia's voice, anxious and hushed. "What if she changes the will?" Andrew replied, his tone low but firm. "I told you, everything's still in her name, but if she keeps this up, I'll have to speed things up." The phrase "speed things up" made my heart pound, but not from fear, from certainty, because I knew without question what I had been waiting for was finally here. I activated the voice recorder on my phone, letting it run quietly throughout the evening. When the final door closed and silence fell, I stepped out into the backyard, where George and I had once planted lavender and climbing roses together. The night breeze was cold but comforting. I pulled out my phone and played back the audio. Clear, coherent, unmistakable, enough to serve as evidence should that moment ever come. 3 days later, I received a cream-colored envelope embossed with the law firm's logo, sent directly from Diana. Inside the envelope was a formal notice. Andrew had submitted a request for a cognitive capacity evaluation on me, carried out by a psychologist of his choosing. The reason he listed was concern that Mrs. Margaret may no longer possess the mental clarity necessary to manage substantial assets. I froze in the middle of the grand foyer, completely still. Not once had I imagined my own son would stoop so low. He didn't come to me. He didn't ask. He didn't open a dialogue. Instead, he went behind my back, a quiet, calculated betrayal, cloaked in legal procedure. I called Diana immediately. Her voice was calm and steady. "I refuse to sign the consent for evaluation," she said, "but I suggest you prepare yourself. He may not stop here." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat alone in the wicker chair on the porch, clutching the leather-bound notebook George once used to record investment notes. I reread a passage he'd written in his strong, unwavering handwriting. "The person who gets the final say is the one who never lets go of the truth. It's not the size of the assets that makes someone powerful, it's the courage to protect them the right way." The next morning, I dressed deliberately, a light brown shearling coat, my Hermes silk scarf, and a small leather handbag. Inside it, I carried only what mattered: my iPad, the audio recording, the contract preserving my estate, and the most recent revised copy of my will. I entered the living room just as Andrew and Olivia were having breakfast. "I'd like to talk," I said clearly. Andrew didn't bother to look up. "What now, Mom?" I pulled out the iPad and played the recording. The room fell silent. Andrew's own voice echoed through the space. "What if she changes the will? Everything's still in her name, but if she keeps this up, I'll have to speed things up." When the audio ended, Olivia's face turned pale. Andrew shot up from his chair. "You were spying on me?" "No," I said evenly. "I was protecting myself." I placed the folder gently on the table. "This is my new will. It has been signed, notarized, and filed with my attorney's office. According to it, I will retain full ownership of all assets until my death. No one, not even you, has the right to demand a transfer, sign on my behalf, or use any of it for investment purposes." Andrew's face turned red. "You're overreacting, Mom." "I thought so too," I replied calmly, "until you secretly submitted a psychiatric evaluation request for me, until you discussed taking over my assets with a stranger, right here, inside my own home." "I'm your son," Andrew growled. "I used to believe that," I said evenly, "until you turned my bedroom into a gaming studio, treated me like a housemaid, and called me the annoying old lady behind my back." I opened my iPad and pressed a button. The Wi-Fi in the house shut off instantly. I had reconfigured the settings remotely using a new security app. "No internet, no privileges, no access to the estate," I said slowly, articulating every word. "If you want to continue living here, you will contribute. If not, that door is always open." Andrew took a step back. Olivia quietly began gathering her things. I turned away, walked up to the second floor, and opened the door to the room I had once been forced to vacate. The day before, I had hired a professional cleaning service. The rows of gaming monitors were now boxed and hauled away. The wardrobe had been returned to its proper place. The new bed linens carried the soft scent of lavender. I sat down on the edge of the bed and closed my eyes. I didn't know how Andrew would respond in the coming days. But I knew one thing with certainty. I had returned to my rightful place, not through tears, not through pleading, but with strategy, quiet resolve, and the unwavering strength of a mother who had endured enough. For a brief moment, I truly believed that after that confrontation, Andrew would stop. I thought that by reclaiming my room, cutting off the Wi-Fi, and locking down the financial accounts, I had drawn a clear boundary between myself, a mother, and Andrew, a son who had forgotten who built the very world he lived in. But I was wrong. Some people, when they lose power, don't retreat, they double down. And Andrew, my own son, was exactly that kind of person. That afternoon, when I returned home from my meditation class, I noticed something was wrong. The door to the reading room didn't open fully when I pushed it. Something heavy was blocking it from the inside. I called a locksmith, assuming it was just a warped hinge or a fallen piece of furniture. But when the door finally swung open, I froze in place. My computer was no longer on the desk, and the iPad, the one containing every document, every record of the estate, was gone. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no scratch marks. Everything was pristine, eerily so. I called Andrew. No answer. I called again. Still nothing. With my heart pounding, I quickly checked my email account. Thankfully, I had set up remote backups. Just as I feared, an alert popped up. There had been unauthorized access from an unfamiliar device at 2:47 p.m. using the Wi-Fi network inside the mansion. My hands trembled, but not from fear. This time, it was rage. I immediately called Diana, my attorney, and reported everything. As always, she remained calm, but this time, her voice carried a heavier tone. "Margaret," she said, "you need to take decisive action. I'm afraid your son may be trying to fabricate evidence that you're mentally unfit or attempting to access your estate portfolio before he's officially removed from all rights and systems." I sat there in silence for a long moment. "Diana," I asked quietly, "if you were in my position, would you evict your own child?" She didn't respond right away. Then, in a firm and deliberate tone, she said, "I wouldn't call it eviction. I'd call it protecting yourself from someone who's weaponizing family ties to abuse your trust." I ended the call, my chest tight with emotion, like a tide rising quietly beneath the surface. That night, Andrew stumbled through the front door just before midnight. His eyes were bloodshot, his breath heavy with alcohol, and his steps unsteady. Olivia was no longer by his side. I assumed she had left once everything spiraled out of control. I was waiting for him in the living room. Only one small lamp was lit, casting a soft amber glow on the wall where George and I had once hung our wedding photo. When Andrew saw me, he froze. "You're still up?" "I'm waiting for an explanation," I said calmly. He let out a laugh, sharp and bitter. "Explanation? What's left to explain? You don't have anything worth holding on to?" I stayed silent. His voice cracked under the weight of liquor and something darker. "You know what, Mom? This house, that car, those stocks you clutch like they're sacred, I'm the one who deserves them. You're just someone who's lived too long." I looked up at him. Those same eyes I had once adored, the ones I used to gently dry after childhood nightmares, now burned with resentment and hunger for control. I stood up, calmly, but with unmistakable firmness. "I'm giving you one final choice, Andrew," I said clearly. "Either you leave this house tonight, no police, no lawsuits, and I won't remove your name from everything. Or I send the footage of you sneaking into my room to my lawyer and report the unauthorized entry." He took a half step back. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm not threatening," I said, my voice steady. "I'm protecting myself, something I should have done a long time ago." Andrew stared at me for a long moment. Then, without a word, he turned and walked upstairs. I sat down and opened the security app. With one tap, my bedroom door locked automatically. All unfamiliar devices were disconnected from the network, and the audio recording, along with the hidden camera footage, was backed up to 3 different secure locations. By the next morning, Andrew was gone. No goodbye, just an empty room, a few crumpled clothes left behind, and a single piece of paper folded neatly on the dining table. "You win, Mom, but you lost me." I read that sentence 3 times. No tears, no pain, just a quiet sense of ash settling in the place where a burn used to live. The days that followed were strangely quiet. No more frantic keyboard clacks. No more trails of Olivia's perfume lingering in the hallway. No more loud, careless laughter spilling down from the second floor. Just the sound of sparrows outside each morning, the gentle pour of tea into my favorite cup, and the sound of my own voice, slowly finding its way back. I cleaned out Andrew's room. I didn't leave it empty. Instead, I transformed it into a second reading room. I filled it with old photographs, George's letters, and the final version of my will. I also wrote a new line in my journal. There are people we must let go, not because they are no longer our flesh and blood, but because they no longer honor the vows shared beneath the same roof. One afternoon, I received a package. No return address. Inside was an old photo frame, an image of me cradling Andrew as a newborn. Tucked within the frame was a single sheet of paper, simple and unadorned. "I'm sorry, Mom, but I'm not brave enough to come back yet. Please live in peace." I held the photo to my chest. Perhaps forgiveness isn't about forgetting. Perhaps it's knowing exactly how deeply you've been hurt and still choosing not to hurt someone back. Since the day Andrew left, my mansion returned to the kind of silence George and I had once cherished. No more chimes from gaming consoles, no more unfamiliar faces walking through my home like it belonged to them. No more blinking lights from my former bedroom keeping me awake through the night. Every morning, I brewed tea like I always had. Earl Grey, one homemade biscuit, and the soft golden light spilling through the sheer glass of the second reading room, a space I now called the George Room, created for quiet healing and reflection. I began tending the garden again. The climbing roses I had assumed were dead after 2 brutal summers had begun to bloom anew. Maybe I had too. I was no longer the woman pushed out of her own bedroom, no longer the mother silently enduring. I was Margaret Whitmore, once again, the master of my home and the keeper of my own spirit. I joined a group of older women at the community center called The Renewed. We met every Tuesday and shared stories no one dared speak aloud within the family, tales of children who manipulated trust, the solitude of aging, and the strength it takes for a mother to rise from heartbreak and reclaim herself. One afternoon, as I was watering the garden, the postman arrived with a special envelope, sealed in gold foil, bearing the emblem of the New York Academy for Private Education and Development. I opened it gently. Inside was a formal invitation. Mrs. Margaret Whitmore, we are honored to invite you as a distinguished guest to our symposium, The Power of Silence, a gathering dedicated to educators and philanthropists whose quiet contributions have shaped lives over the past 40 years. The symposium will be held at the Ritz-Carlton, New York. All travel and accommodation expenses will be covered, and you will be awarded the George Stanton Medal in recognition of your enduring service to national education. I was stunned. George Stanton was the founder of the California State Education Council, the same institution George, my late husband, had worked with during the final year of his life. I never imagined that I, a woman who had been retired for over a decade, would be mentioned on such a prestigious guest list. Quietly, in my heart, I nodded. I would go. I called Deborah, my financial advisor, and asked her to book me a business class flight and a luxury hotel. It wasn't about showing off. It was about reminding myself that I no longer needed anyone to lead me. I could walk on my own with confidence and grace. I arrived in New York on a mild spring afternoon. The hotel was nestled along Fifth Avenue, just steps from Central Park. My room overlooked a serene lake, where white swans drifted gently across the water like something out of an old painting. That first night, I couldn't sleep, not because the bed was unfamiliar, but because something inside me stirred, as if a larger moment was approaching, something I hadn't quite named yet. And the next morning, when I stepped into the grand ballroom bathed in golden chandelier light, it arrived. I saw Olivia. She stood on stage, elegantly dressed, her hair swept up in a polished bun, smiling graciously as she greeted guests like she belonged there, as if she were an official representative of the event. I was frozen in place. Olivia, the same woman who once ate breakfast with her bare hands on my marble kitchen counter, who wandered my halls in a nightgown like she owned the place, was now representing an academic conference. I quietly made my way to the information desk and spoke to the event coordinator. "Excuse me, who is Olivia Rose?" I asked, pretending not to know. "She's the director of communications for the Edridge Group," the woman replied. "They're the primary sponsor for this year's event. Word is, she used to live with a respected elderly educator in California to gather material for a forthcoming book." I could barely process what I had just heard. Back in my room, I opened my laptop and typed in Edridge plus Olivia Rose. The search results that popped up left me completely shaken. She had signed a publishing deal for a book titled Upstairs Inside: Secrets of the Aging Elite, marketed as based on real-life experiences living with a wealthy, cognitively declining woman who didn't realize she was being taken advantage of. A chill ran through me. I knew immediately she was writing about me, and worse still, the book's brief description included chillingly specific details: Italian bed linens, George's watch collection, even the exact meals I used to prepare. She hadn't just freeloaded, she was turning me into commercial content. I sat frozen in my luxury hotel room, eyes locked on the screen. And there it was, the book's proposed cover image, along with Olivia's byline and the tagline. A raw, honest, and at times heartbreaking portrait of the wealthy yet isolated elderly, easily manipulated, silently fading. A true account captured from inside the very mansion where I lived with her for 2 years. 2 years. She had stayed in my home for 8 months. 8 months during which she didn't care, didn't connect, didn't contribute. She observed, she scribbled, and she built a warped version of my life to sell to the world. I gripped the armrest of the chair. I couldn't let this go. I picked up the phone and called Linda Harper, my old friend, and now the director of an advocacy group specializing in elder legal protection. I forwarded her everything. The book summary, screenshots of the listing, and a copy of the event invitation. She called back in less than 10 minutes. "Do you want to file for commercial defamation and invasion of privacy?" she asked. "No," I replied. "I don't just want to sue her. I want to expose her, in public, in front of everyone." Linda chuckled, her tone both fierce and proud. "Then we're about to play a very big game of chess." The next morning, I dressed with intention. I wore a deep emerald silk gown. One George once said made me look like a high court judge. I pulled my hair into a neat bun, fastened the vintage Patek Philippe watch I had always kept in the safe, and walked into the ballroom as a living testament to dignity that refuses to be erased. On stage, Olivia was delivering a speech about the hidden worth behind quiet lives. She spoke with a tone of solemn depth, her eyes glistening as though she were deeply moved by some profound human sadness. I raised my hand. The moderator glanced in my direction, spotted the name tag that read Margaret Whitmore, and gave a respectful nod, inviting me to speak. I approached the microphone, my voice calm but resolute. "I was quite moved by what Ms. Olivia just shared," I began. "I only have one small question. You mentioned living with an elderly woman as part of your research. Would you mind telling us her name?" The entire ballroom fell into an uneasy silence. Olivia hesitated for a brief moment. Then she smiled politely. "I'd prefer not to reveal her identity for the sake of protecting her privacy." I nodded. "Then let me ask this. If that very woman were standing before you now, with every right to challenge the words you've written about her, would you be willing to let her speak?" Olivia stiffened. Her expression froze. I reached into my handbag and pulled out my iPad. Then, without another word, I played an old audio recording. Her voice echoed through the speakers, unmistakably clear. "That senile old woman lives off her dead husband's money. I'm just riding it out until something better comes along." Gasps rippled through the audience. Cameras clicked to life. Attendees leaned toward one another in hushed whispers. A reporter from the New York Times stood up abruptly and rushed out of the room, clearly preparing to break a major story. I didn't say another word. I simply returned to my seat. Olivia stood frozen under the spotlight, her face pale and stunned. But the most surprising moment was still to come. That evening, during the private reception for honored guests, I entered the ballroom with the quiet intent of pouring myself a glass of lemonade when a voice called out gently behind me. "Excuse me, are you Margaret Whitmore?" I turned around. A man in his early 40s stood before me, dressed in a tailored suit, his face somehow achingly familiar. "You don't recognize me, do you?" he said, smiling warmly. "I'm Lucas Thorne, son of your former gardener, Mr. Thorne. I used to play in your garden all the time, back when you and Mr. George still lived together." I stood still, stunned. Lucas Thorne. The little boy who used to sit and draw by the lavender fence. The child I once gave his first paintbrush from George's collection. How are you here?" I asked, nearly breathless. Lucas smiled. "I'm the new CEO of Edridge." It felt like I had been pulled out of reality. "And trust me," Lucas continued, "when I saw the name Olivia Rose on the publishing contract, I was suspicious. Our legal team has been reviewing the manuscript, but after this morning, there's no need to review anything further. We're terminating the deal, and I want to formally invite you to become the face of Edridge's new campaign, Beauty Beyond 70, a tribute to women like you, women who rise even after betrayal." I could barely breathe. "You're doing this? Why?" "Because no one ever believed in me the way you did," Lucas said gently. "You didn't just give me my first paintbrush. You once taught me that sometimes the greatest people are the ones no one talks about. I want to change that." I looked at Lucas, now a successful man, yet still holding the eyes of the little boy I remembered. I nodded, not for the recognition, but because I knew if George were standing beside me, he would be nodding too. 1 month after the event in New York, I became the face of the Beauty Beyond 70 campaign, not for physical beauty, but as a symbol of something timeless. A woman standing alone in front of a grand old mansion, holding a cup of tea, with a closed door behind her and a world she had learned to reclaim. That image appeared on the covers of major publications, Vogue Mature, Time's Legacy Edition, and featured in PBS's documentary program, The Voices We Missed. I was invited to speak at universities, not to retell a story of sorrow, but to share how silence can become its own form of defiance. I used to believe my life had reached its final chapter, but as it turns out, I was only just beginning a new one, a chapter of life autonomy, and a pride no longer buried beneath the title of mother. One day, as I was preparing a keynote for a talk at Stanford, the doorbell rang. I glanced at the security screen and froze. It was Andrew. I opened the door. He looked noticeably thinner, his shirt wrinkled, a cardboard box clutched in his hands. There was no Olivia, no trace of the aggression he once carried like armor, just a man nearing 40, standing in silence like the little boy who used to hide behind my skirt when he was scared. "Can I come in?" he asked softly. I stepped aside without a word. He placed the box on the table and gently opened it. Inside were all the financial documents I thought were gone, my tablet, bank records, George's leather-bound journal. Everything was intact. "I kept them because I wanted control," Andrew said quietly. "But when I lost everything, I realized what I truly lost wasn't the money. It was you." I sat down slowly, my hand resting on George's old journal. Andrew bowed his head deeply. "I've started treatment," he said. "I see a therapist every week. I'm sorry I made you feel like a stranger in your own home." I didn't say, "I forgive you." I said, "This house has changed, and so have I. If you want to return, not as its master, but as a son, you'll need to accept that." Andrew nodded. Then he handed me a handwritten letter, the ink slightly shaky but the lines clear. "Mom, if there comes a day when you no longer want me to call you Mom, I will understand. But if there's still room in this house, and in your heart, for a son who is learning how to be a better man, then I would like to start over." Andrew. I folded the letter and placed it gently in my keepsake box, right beside George's letters. That evening, I made 2 cups of tea. One for me, one for Andrew. Neither of us said much, but in that quiet, there was a beginning. 2 months later, I was honored on national television. NBC aired a special program titled The Mansion Mother, A Story Beyond Time. They invited me to the stage alongside Lucas Thorne, Linda Harper, and, most unexpectedly, Andrew. He walked onto the stage, the lights casting a direct beam across the face of a man once lost, once defiant. And in front of millions of viewers, he said, "This is my mother. Not because she gave birth to me, but because she never gave up on me, even when I tried so hard to give up on her. I don't deserve her, but I am grateful, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that I am relearning how to love her, not just because she is my mother, but because she is the most remarkable human being I have ever known." The audience rose in applause. I reached for Andrew's hand, not too tightly, not without hesitation, but truthfully. That night, I wrote the final pages of my life story in a brand new journal, bound in forest green leather, embossed with gold lettering that read, "Margaret Whitmore, no longer a shadow." I wrote, "At 72, I am not trying to reclaim my youth. I am reclaiming my presence. I no longer need to be recognized as a mother, a wife, or a homeowner. I only need to be seen as myself, a woman who has loved, who has lost, and who has learned to rise from the very place where she was forgotten." The lesson: never mistake silence for weakness. A mother may stay quiet for a lifetime, but when she chooses to rise, she can shake the world. Motherhood does not always require forgiveness, but it always allows for hope. And rebirth has no age. It only needs a reason, and a woman brave enough to stop stepping backward. A message to our viewers: if my story brought you to tears, not because it was sad, but because you saw yourself somewhere within it, please share this story. Leave a comment below. Have you ever been a Margaret, or were you once an Andrew? Click like if you believe it's never too late to reclaim your dignity. And don't forget to subscribe to She Stories Margaret, to listen, to heal, and to rise again from the kinds of losses no one ever believed we could survive. Thank you for walking with me to the very end of this road. I am Margaret Whitmore, and I am still here, standing tall. This is a fictional story that is not intended to offend or target anyone. It is created solely to convey a meaningful lesson to viewers, and all character names are entirely fictional.